The train's whistle screamed through the mountain air as Cordelia Whitmore clutched her worn carpetbag, her heart hammering against her ribs. The conductor's gruff voice had called Millhaven Station, but the platform looked nothing like the bustling town described in Jeremiah Ashford's letters. Instead of the promised mercantile and hotel, she saw only a weathered depot and rolling hills dotted with homesteads. "Wait!" she called out, but the iron beast was already pulling away, belching black smoke that stung her eyes. The platform shuddered under her boots as she watched her only connection to civilization disappear around a bend. A small hand tugged at her emerald traveling dress. Cordelia looked down to find a girl of perhaps 6 years, her auburn hair tangled with burrs, and her bare feet dusty from running. Tears streaked down her freckled cheeks as she gazed up with desperate blue eyes. "Please, miss, Daddy needs you. He's been waiting and waiting, and now he won't wake up proper." Cordelia's breath caught. This child's father could he be expecting? A bride as well? "What's your name, little one?" "Magnolia Thorne, but everyone calls me Maggie. Daddy said a lady was coming to help us, to make us a real family again. He's been sick with the fever for 3 days now, talking about angels and such nonsense." The weight of her mistake pressed down on Cordelia's shoulders like a stone. She'd been corresponding with Jeremiah Ashford of Millhaven, not some fever-stricken stranger in this isolated valley. But as she looked into Maggie's pleading eyes, she felt something shift inside her chest, a pull she couldn't name. "Where is your daddy now?" "At our cabin, just over the ridge. He keeps asking for his bride between the shivering fits. Says she know what to do about the medicine and the cooking and—" Maggie's voice broke. "I can't lose him too, miss. Mama went to heaven when the snow melted, and it's just been him and me since." Cordelia knelt down, her practical mind warring with her heart. She'd traveled 1,500 miles from Boston to escape a life of servitude to her demanding aunt, seeking a fresh start as Jeremiah's wife. But here was a child in desperate need, and somewhere beyond those hills, a man might be dying while waiting for help that would never come. "Can you show me the way, Maggie?" The girl's face lit up like sunrise. "You'll really come? You'll help Daddy?" Cordelia stood, adjusting her hat with trembling fingers. She thought of Jeremiah Ashford waiting in the real Millhaven, perhaps wondering why his bride hadn't arrived. She thought of her aunt's cruel letters back in Boston, demanding her return. Then she looked at Maggie's hopeful expression and made her choice. "Lead on, child. Let's go help your father." They walked together across the dusty platform, Maggie chattering about her daddy's kindness and strength, about how he'd been the finest horse trainer in 3 counties before the fever took hold. With each step away from the depot, Cordelia felt her old life falling behind her like autumn leaves. Whatever lay ahead in that unknown cabin, she sensed it would change everything she thought she knew about love, family, and home. The cabin materialized through the pine trees like something from a fever dream, rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, a stone chimney sending lazy smoke into the afternoon sky, and a small garden where tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. Maggie bounded ahead, her voice echoing off the mountains. "Daddy, Daddy, I found her, the lady from the train." Cordelia followed more slowly, her city boots sliding on the pine needles. Through the open door, she glimpsed a figure hunched in a chair by the cold hearth, his dark hair matted with sweat, his broad shoulders shaking with chills despite the warm day. Double quotes, Maggie, child. You shouldn't have ... The man's voice was rough as gravel, weakened by illness. When he raised his head, Cordelia's breath caught in her throat. Even sick, Dorian Thorne was striking sharp cheekbones shadowed by several days' growth of beard, deep-set eyes the color of winter storms, and hands that spoke of honest work despite their current trembling. "Sir, I'm Cordelia Whitmore. Your daughter found me at the depot." She set down her bag and approached cautiously. "She says you've been expecting someone?" Dorian blinked slowly, confusion clouding his features. You single quotes re the bride? But I never. Maggie, what did you tell this lady? The little girl's face crumpled. I told her you needed help, that you were waiting for the lady to come make us a family. You said so yourself when the fever was worst. You kept talking about needing a woman's touch, about how Maggie deserved a mother. Oh, sweetheart. Dorian's voice broke as understanding dawned. I was talking foolishness. Wishing for things. That can't be. He looked up at Cordelia, embarrassment coloring his pale cheeks. Miss, I'm sorry for the confusion. My daughter, she lost her mother this spring, and I've been struggling to care for her proper while working the horses. The fevers made me ramble about impossible dreams. Cordelia studied his honest face, the way he tried to sit straighter despite his weakness. How his eyes never left his daughter even while speaking to her. Something in her chest tightened, not with fear or disappointment, but with recognition. This man loved his child with every fiber of his being, just as she had always dreamed of being loved. When did you last eat? She asked, rolling up her sleeves. What? Food, Mr. Thorne. When did you last have a proper meal? She was already moving toward the kitchen area, assessing the meager supplies. And Maggie, when did your father take his last dose of medicine? Medicine's been gone 2 days, Maggie whispered. Daddy spent the coin on new shoes for me instead. Cordelia's throat tightened. She turned back to Dorian, who was watching her with a mixture of wariness and wonder. I may not be the bride you were expecting, Mr. Thorne, but I know how to tend fever and I can cook a decent meal. Your daughter needs you well, and right now, you need help. I can't pay you, he said quietly. Whatever you're thinking, I've got nothing to offer except gratitude. She began stoking the fire, her movement sure and practiced. Then it's fortunate. I'm not here for payment. Maggie, can you show me where your father keeps the herbs? And we'll need cool water from the well. As she worked, Cordelia felt something she'd never experienced in her aunt's house, a sense of belonging, of being truly needed. The wrong train stop was beginning to feel like destiny. By evening, the cabin had transformed. The sharp scent of willow bark tea mingled with the aroma of rabbit stew bubbling over the fire. Dorian's fever had broken an hour ago, and he sat propped against pillows Cordelia had fashioned from feed sacks, watching her move about his home with quiet amazement. You don't have to do all this, he said for the dozenth time, but his protest lacked conviction. The relief in his eyes was unmistakable. Hush, Cordelia replied, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. You're still weak as a newborn colt. She handed him the bowl, their fingers brushing for an instant. The touch sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. Eat slowly. Your stomach needs time to remember what food is for. Maggie perched on a three-legged stool beside her father's chair, chattering about everything Cordelia had done, how she'd sent Maggie to gather herbs while she cleaned the cabin, how she'd known exactly which roots would bring down fever, how she'd somehow made their meager supplies stretch into a feast. Where did you learn all this? Dorian asked between careful spoonfuls. Cordelia settled into the chair across from him, her own bowl warming her hands. My mother was a healer before she married my father. She taught me plants and remedies before she died. After that, She hesitated, then decided on honesty. I lived with my aunt in Boston. She believed in keeping me useful. Something flickered in Dorian's expression, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of pain carefully hidden. What brought you west? The lie she'd prepared about adventure and new opportunities died on her lips. Looking at this man who'd nearly sacrificed his own health for his daughter's needs, she found she couldn't dissemble. I was meant to marry a man named Jeremiah Ashford in Millhaven, a mail-order arrangement. She stared into her stew. I got off at the wrong station. And now you're trapped here with strangers, Dorian said quietly. No. The word came out more firmly than she'd intended. She looked up to find him watching her intently. I made a choice to help. No one trapped me. Maggie, who had been listening with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. Are you going to leave when Daddy gets better? Are you going to find that other man? The question hung in the air like smoke from the fire. Cordelia felt Dorian's gaze on her, steady and patient. He wouldn't pressure her. She could see that in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself apart. This man had been hurt before, had learned not to hope for more than he could safely hold. I don't know, she answered honestly. I suppose I should write to Mr. Ashford, explain what happened. The mail writer comes through once a week, Dorian offered. You could send word, ask him to meet you here if you wanted. The suggestion was practical, sensible. So why did the thought of Jeremiah Ashford riding up to collect her make her stomach clench with something like dread? Maybe, she sighed, then changed the subject to safer ground. Maggie tells me you train horses. Dorian's face lit up the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Best horses in 3 counties, though I say so myself. Would you like to see them tomorrow? If you're staying that long. The careful hope in his voice made her chest tight. I'd like that very much. That night, Cordelia lay on the narrow cot in the cabin's single bedroom while Dorian and Maggie shared blankets by the fire. Through the thin walls, she could hear their quiet conversation, Maggie asking if Cordelia might stay longer. Dorian's gentle reminder that the lady had her own life to live. But as she stared up at the rough ceiling, Cordelia wondered if that was true anymore. The morning sun painted the valley in shades of gold and amber as Dorian led Cordelia toward the corral. His step was stronger today, though she noticed he still favored his left side. Maggie skipped between them, chattering about each horse by name and temperament. That's Windrunner, she's fastest but stubborn as sin. And there's Copper, he's gentle enough for babies to ride. Oh, and Thunder's the one Daddy's been training for the cavalryman in Denver. Cordelia counted at least 20 horses in various paddocks, their coats gleaming with health despite their owner's recent illness. You've built something impressive here, Mr. Thorne. Dorian, he corrected, leaning against the fence rail. And it wasn't just me. My late wife, Iris, she had a way with the difficult ones. Could gentle a wild stallion with nothing but patience and sugar cubes. The way he spoke his wife's name with reverence, but without the sharp edge of fresh grief, told Cordelia he was healing. Still mourning, but no longer drowning in sorrow. She must have been remarkable. She was. He glanced at Cordelia sideways. Would have liked you, I think. She always said kindness was the rarest gift a person could give. Before Cordelia could respond, a commotion erupted from the far paddock. A magnificent black stallion had reared up, striking at the air while a foul young man stumbled backward, his face pale with fear. Storm! Dorian vaulted the fence despite his weakness, moving with a horseman's instinctive grace. Easy, boy, easy. The stallion's eyes rolled white with panic. Cordelia could see why fresh rope burns on his neck spoke of someone trying to break him with force rather than trust. Her heart clenched as she watched Dorian approach slowly, his voice low and soothing. Who did this? Dorian demanded, not taking his eyes off the agitated horse. The young man, barely 20 and clearly one of Dorian's hired hands, stammered his response. Mr. Kellerman came by while you were sick. Said Storm was taking too long to train, that he'd show us how it's done proper. He had ropes and ... Get out. Dorian's voice was deadly quiet. Pack your things and get off my land. But Mr. Thorne, I was just, now. As the hand slunk away, Dorian continued his approach to the stallion. But Storm's panic had reached a crescendo. With a scream of rage and fear, the horse lashed out, his hoof catching Dorian across the ribs. Dorian hit the ground hard and didn't get up. "Daddy!" Maggie's shriek pierced the morning air. Cordelia was already moving, climbing the fence with a speed that surprised her. She'd grown up around her father's horses before he died, before her aunt had sold everything and dragged her to the city. The old knowledge came flooding back: how to read a horse's body language, how to project calm in the face of fear. "Stay back, Maggie," she called, never taking her eyes off Storm. The stallion stood over Dorian's still form, sides heaving, ears pinned flat against his head. "Easy, beautiful," Cordelia murmured, moving into the paddock. "No one's going to hurt you anymore, I promise." Something in her voice must have reached him. Storm's ears flicked forward slightly, his wild eyes focusing on her face. She continued talking, nonsense words mixed with promises, edging closer one careful step at a time. When she was close enough, she knelt beside Dorian, her hands checking for serious injury while never breaking eye contact with the horse. Dorian was breathing, conscious but dazed, his arm cradled against his side. "Can you stand?" she asked quietly. "Think so," he gasped. "Ribs might be cracked." Together, moving slowly to avoid startling Storm further, they made it to the fence. Only then did Cordelia allow herself to breathe fully again. "How did you do?" "That?" Dorian asked, leaning heavily against the rail. "He nearly killed me, then stood there like a lamb for you." Cordelia looked back at Storm, who was now cropping grass as if nothing had happened. "Sometimes the frightened recognize each other," she said softly. 3 days passed in a haze of healing and discovery. Dorian's ribs were indeed cracked, leaving him bedridden and restless while Cordelia managed the household and helped with the horses. She found herself falling into the rhythm of this life morning chores, teaching Maggie her letters, preparing meals from their simple stores. On the third evening, as she sat mending one of Maggie's torn dresses by lamplight, Dorian spoke from his makeshift bed by the fire. "The mail rider comes tomorrow." Cordelia's needle paused mid-stitch. They'd been dancing around this topic for days, neither willing to address the elephant in their small room. "I know. You should write to your intended. Let him know what happened." "Should I?" She set down her sewing and looked at him directly. "What would you have me tell him, Dorian? That I got off at the wrong station and decided to stay? Is that what you've decided?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross first. Cordelia rose and moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit valley. In Boston, she'd gazed out at brick walls and listened to the endless clatter of carriages. Here, the silence was broken only by wind in the pines and the distant call of a night bird. "I've been thinking about that day on the platform," she said finally, "when Maggie grabbed my dress and said you needed me. I could have walked away. Any sensible woman would have found a way to the next town, would have continued on to meet her intended husband. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." She turned to face him. "Do you want to know why?" Dorian's eyes were dark pools in the firelight. "Tell me." "Because for the first time in my life, someone needed me. Not my labor or my obedience or my silence me. The person I am underneath all the expectations and arrangements." Her voice grew stronger. "In Boston, I was a burden to be endured. To Jeremiah Ashford, I would have been a transaction completed. But here your family," Maggie piped up from her nest of blankets on the floor, where they'd all assumed she was sleeping. "Maggie," Dorian started, but his daughter sat up, her small face fierce with determination. "She is, Daddy. She makes the best flapjacks, and she taught me how to braid horses' manes. And when you were hurt, she took care of everything just like Mama used to. And she's not scared of Storm anymore." It was true. Over the past few days, Cordelia had been working with a black stallion, using patience instead of force. He still wouldn't let anyone else near him, but for her, He'd grown gentle as a lamb. "What? Are you saying, little star?" Dorian asked gently. "I'm saying maybe the train stopping at the wrong place wasn't wrong at all. Maybe it was right, and we just didn't know it yet." Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. From the mouths of babes came wisdom that adults spent lifetimes learning. She looked at Dorian, seeing her own hope reflected in his expression. "I have a confession," she said quietly. "I wrote that letter to Jeremiah 3 days ago, but I haven't been able to bring myself to give it to the mail writer." Dorian sat up slowly, wincing as his ribs protested. "Why not?" "Because I don't want to leave. Because when I imagine riding away from here, from you and Maggie, my chest feels like it's caving in." The words came out in a rush. "Because I think I might be falling in love with this life, with this place ... with you." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and fear in equal measure. Then Dorian smiled the first truly radiant smile she'd seen from him. "Then stay," he said simply. "Not as my mail-order bride or out of obligation, but as the woman who chose us when she didn't have to. Stay and let us choose you back." The wedding took place 6 months later on the first warm day of spring, when the mountain meadows blazed with wildflowers and the air hummed with promise. Cordelia wore her mother's pearl necklace and a dress of ivory silk that the women of the valley had helped her sew. Maggie served as flower girl and chief conspirator, having spent weeks planning every detail with the excited thoroughness of a 6-year-old. "Are you nervous, Mrs. Soon-to-be Thorne?" asked Juniper McAllister, the preacher's wife, as she helped arrange Cordelia's hair. "Terrified," Cordelia admitted, watching through the cabin window as neighbors streamed in from across the valley. She'd grown to know these people over the winter months, the Hutchinson family from the next ridge, the widow Patterson who lived alone with her dozen cats, old Henrik who told stories that grew taller with each telling. "Good," Juniper laughed. "Shows you know what you're getting into. Love isn't for the faint of heart." Outside, Dorian stood beneath an arch of pine boughs, fidgeting with his string tie. He'd recovered completely from his injuries and the winter. Months of Cordelia's good cooking had filled out his frame. More than that, the shadows had lifted from his eyes. He looked like a man who had learned to hope again. "You ready, sweetheart?" Cordelia asked Maggie, who was clutching her basket of rose petals like precious treasure. "Been ready since that day you got off that train," Maggie replied with perfect seriousness. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. As Cordelia walked down the makeshift aisle between their friends and neighbors, she caught sight of Storm in the nearby paddock, his black coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. He whinnied as if in approval, making the gathered crowd chuckle. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, "we are gathered here today to witness something rare and beautiful. Two souls who found each other not through careful planning, but through grace and the mysterious workings of Providence." When it came time for vows, Dorian took Cordelia's hands in his work-roughened ones. "Cordelia," he said, his voice strong and sure, "you came to us like an answer to prayers I didn't know I was praying. You healed more than my fever. You healed our hearts. I promise to love you not just for what you've given us, but for who you are. I promise to be worthy of the choice you made that day on the platform." Cordelia's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Dorian, I thought I was getting on a train to marry a stranger. Instead, I found my way home to a family I didn't know I was meant to have. I choose you. I choose Maggie. I choose this life we're building together. Not because I have to, but because I want to, every single day." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the valley rang with cheers and the sound of Storm's triumphant whinny. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Henrik played his fiddle while couples danced beneath the stars. Children chased fireflies between the tables laden with food that every family had contributed. Maggie fell asleep in Cordelia's lap during the toasts, her small face peaceful with contentment. "No regrets?" Dorian asked quietly as they swayed together to the music, his new wife warm in his arms. Cordelia looked around at their chosen family, at the life they'd built from a chance encounter and a little girl's desperate plea. "Only one," she said. His face clouded with concern. "What's that?" She smiled, standing on her toes to whisper in his ear. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the best destinations are the ones you never planned to find." 2 years later, Cordelia stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Dorian teach their toddler son, Reaver, how to approach the horses. Maggie, now 8 and wise beyond her years, served as assistant instructor, her serious expression making Cordelia smile. "Gentle hands, River," Maggie was saying. "Remember, horses are big, but they have big feelings too." River, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, nodded solemnly and patted Copper's nose with the careful reverence of a child who'd grown up understanding that all living things deserved respect. "He's going to be a natural," said a familiar voice behind her. Cordelia turned to find Jeremiah Ashford standing on their porch, his hat in his hands and a gentle smile on his weathered face. She'd written to him 2 years ago, explaining what had happened and apologizing for the confusion. His response had surprised her with its graciousness and understanding. "Jeremiah, what brings you all this way?" "Business in Denver, thought I'd stop by and see how you folks were doing." He looked past her to where Dorian was lifting River onto Copper's back. "Looks like everything worked out the way it was supposed to." "More than I ever could have imagined," Cordelia agreed. "Will you stay for supper?" "Maggie would love to meet the famous Jeremiah Ashford." "Famous?" He laughed. "What stories have you been telling?" "Only that you were kind enough to release a confused woman from her obligations without making her feel like a fool." They were interrupted by thunder hooves and delighted squealing. Storm, now fully trained but still choosy about his riders, was cantering around the paddock with Maggie on his back. The once wild stallion had become her special mount, as if recognizing a kindred spirit in the motherless girl who'd needed him as much as he'd needed her. "That's the horse that nearly killed you?" Jeremiah asked Dorian as he approached with River perched on his shoulders. "The very same," Dorian replied, shifting his son to shake Jeremiah's hand. "Turns out he just needed someone who understood what it felt like to be scared and angry." "Speaking of understanding," Cordelia said, noticing the way Jeremiah's eyes kept drifting toward the Hutchinson place visible on the next ridge. "Have you met our neighbor, Violet Hutchinson? She's a widow with 2 young boys, and she makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. Jeremiah's ears reddened slightly. "Can't say I've had the pleasure." "Well then," Maggie announced, having overheard from where she was cooling down Storm, "you'll just have to stay long enough for us to fix that. Right, Mama Cordelia?" Cordelia's heart still skipped when Maggie called her that. The title had evolved naturally over their first year together, born of love rather than law, and it meant more to her than any formal adoption papers ever could. That evening, their table overflowed with family and friends. Jeremiah regaled them with stories from his travels while Violet Hutchinson blushed prettily and served generous slices of the promised pie. River dozed in Cordelia's arms while Maggie peppered their guest with questions about life in the big towns. Later, after their visitors had gone and the children were tucked into their beds, Cordelia and Dorian sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge over their valley. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gotten on the right train that day?" Dorian asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Cordelia considered this. "I think about it sometimes. I probably would have been content enough with Jeremiah. He's a good man. But content isn't the same as happy, is it?" "No," Dorian agreed. "It's not. What about you? Do you ever regret that I stumbled into your life instead of staying where I belonged?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then he spoke, his voice soft with wonder. Cordelia, love, you didn't stumble into our lives. You were led here. By Iris, by fate, by whatever force in the universe makes sure that broken things find their way to the people who know how to make them whole again. Even if it means getting off at the wrong stop, especially then. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. The wrong stop brought us the right life. In the distance, storm whinnied softly, and a night bird called from the pines. Inside their home, River stirred in his sleep while Maggie dreamed of horse races and adventures. And on the porch swing that Dorian had built for quiet moments like this, a woman who had once thought herself unwanted held the love of her life and marveled at how beautifully wrong turns could lead to exactly where you belonged. Sometimes, the best journeys were the ones that began with getting lost.